We are back in session and are ready to hear a Board of Architectural Review appeal at 439 Fayette Park. Mr. Crum.
All right, Daniel Crum, planning staff. As we go along this presentation, we are aware that you all do not have the items in Granicus as you normally do. So if there's anything additionally needed, just flag to staff. But this is a appeal of a decision by the Board of Architectural Review. And so in that instance, you all as the Planning Commission have the ability to hold a de novo hearing where you consider the record on this case, hear testimony from the planning staff, the historic preservation staff, as well as the applicant in this matter. And you'll give that the appropriate findings. So the applicant in this case are Kevin Egan and Adam Wheeler, and this is for the property at 439 Fayette Park within the Fayette Park H1 area. This is regarding changes that were made to the exterior, so really not to do with the structure itself, but rather the steps, walkway, and the general treatment of kind of the front yard area. But essentially, this is requesting approval to construct brick stairs, sidewalk, knee walls, and install limestone edging within an historic overlay zone. So they are appealing a decision of the BOAR in July to deny their certificate of appropriateness for the work in that area. So for the Fayette Park Historic Overlay, relatively small compared to some of the other historic overlays we have here in Lexington. It's only about 16 properties generally located, so it's off North Broadway and is accessed through this roadway here. And all properties within this area are zoned R1C and contain single-family residential uses. It is approximately 6.8 acres in size. So here is a view of Fayette Park. So this is the subject property. This was taken in 2022, but the subject property is the home on your far left. But this is just giving you an idea of kind of the context of the area, and really the areas that you need to be paying most attention to are sort of the front yard areas. So this is the areas that have been impacted by the applicant's request. Generally speaking, the right side of Fayette Park as it loops around is characterized kind of by a little bit of rolling topography, generally open yards that share a pretty consistent trend of these concrete sidewalks and steps with metal railings, a very open look that kind of defines most of this neighborhood. Flip side, as you're looping around, there are a couple properties in the vicinity that do have some traits that somewhat differ. We will spend some time within the staff's explanation talking about this particular property here, which is 438 Fayette Park, and some of the exceptions it has, especially as it relates to some existing brick elements and kind of how we got there. But looking a little bit further down the street, once again, primarily open lawns that don't necessarily have formal edges and boundaries associated with them, kind of sharing those same commonalities with materials, open feel, and kind of the feel of the area. And this is the view kind of looking at it. So it does have this middle green landscape and treed area. So the legal basis for historic preservation, this is the standard legal information needed as you all consider the requests, and it sort of serves as the framework from which you all evaluate historic overlays, focusing on consistency and kind of treating and maintaining the integrity of the H1 overlays. It does include landscaping and tree protection as well. So looking at this site in particular, the subject property is somewhat of a unique shaped parcel right at the corner. So the subject property's single-family residence is located in this front portion, but the property itself extends further back. But it's really the portions in the front yard area that staff is going to be focusing on. So this is a picture of the property that is taken today. And to kind of illustrate how this property has changed over time, several subsequent slides are going to show kind of the before and after. One of the most important things to note, though, is while you'll notice a change in the color/staining of the home, that is not subject to this request. They went through the appropriate channels and received approval for that. Really, what we will be focusing on is this portion here, as well as the limestone edging that circulates around the property here and here. So we thankfully, courtesy of Google Earth, were able to time travel a little bit. So to the left, we have the image of the subject property as it existed in 2022, as well as the proposed or the work that has been conducted without a certificate of appropriateness shown on the right. So the applicant's request to the BOAR was for several elements. The first was the removal of the existing concrete stairs and walkway here. This has been replaced with brick and the knee wall pavers here. Also, the existing wooden steps have been removed and replaced with brick as well. And then limestone edging around the perimeter of the property and extends to the opposite side of the sidewalk as well. So those elements historically weren't present. Up until 2022, the lawn was kind of largely, gently sloping down like other properties in the vicinity, and that concrete element had been a consistent part of the house at least since the properties were involved in the historic overlay in 1985. So here's the image of the portions to the left. So once again, there is an existing sycamore tree here, or an existing significant tree here. I'm not entirely sure the species off the top of my head. But that area has once again been incorporated with limestone edging in this portion right here. And this is a little bit closer view of the brickwork itself. Worth noting that sort of the decorative elements on top that are not actually kind of permanent construction are also not under consideration. So it's really the limestone and the brick as it's treated kind of from the street all the way to the house. Yes. Yes.
Is there limestone lining at the far left of that picture?
So are you talking about right here?
Yeah.
So that is a part of a sort of walkway that was approved on, or the part of the stairs that was approved for an adjoining property. I believe that that's concrete, but the historic preservation staff can verify that. But that is basically the steps on the adjoining property and kind of the reinforcement for those. So the case history, in November of 2023, the applicant received a COA for repairs and modification, or repairs to the existing sidewalk, steps, and in just really more of a maintenance measure than a replacement measure. However, those changes occurred, so instead of repairing, it was a replace and alter. And so in May, the Historic Preservation Office notified the applicant that those changes didn't line up with what they received a certificate of appropriateness for. And then in July, they presented their request retroactively for those changes, which was ultimately disapproved. And then today in August, within the required 30-day filing period, the applicant filed their appeal. And so now you're judging this on its merits. So when we talk about the local guidelines, the principles that you're going to be looking at are laid out in our guidelines. We have a copy of that to enter into the record, so we want to do that at this time as well. But really, when the intent behind the front yard area is to make sure that it's compatible with the site and surrounding properties, not to be visually dominant, intrusive, or suggesting a false sense of histories. And really, when we're talking about vistas and approaches and the feel of those yards and areas to maintain, as well as calling for the maintenance of existing trees. So the criteria that are cited within the historic preservation and planning staff's respective staff reports are laid out, as well as cited within our report. Within the HPO findings, essentially the reasons for disapproval boil down to that existing element where these sidewalks have kind of a consistent character for the most part, and then you have those properties that roll down to the street and kind of have these open, maintained yards. And this request introduced these new elements that were not compatible and kind of made an alteration to that feel. Within the applicant's letter of appeal, they have submitted a number of supplementary documents. So some of these are pictures of the home, pictures of surrounding properties, pictures of other properties kind of in the greater Lexington area that may not be specific to the Fayette Park overlay. But they kind of, they they respond to several aspects of it, essentially saying that these new elements are materials that would have been found there, that they're compatible. They say that while they were excavating the front porch area, they found evidence of red brick stairs. Now, while they don't know how that was actually done at that time, there is some evidence that at some point brick was used in those areas. They compare the block walls to other elements within the neighborhood, some of which are not necessarily found in the front yard, but with an area that was developed when it was, brick was a common material. But what we're really focusing on today is sort of the treatment of the front yard and the work that occurred there. Also in their letter of justification or appeal, they talk about, and it was discussed at the BOAR hearing, was concerns with issues of erosion, especially around the significant tree that is in their front yard. And they opine that that edging is necessary in order to prevent issues of erosion. And so they provide several photos. For the interest of time, staff is not going to go through every single one, but the significant ones are showing the portions where they excavated and appeared to find some brick that was present and installed at some point in time. They also provided some examples from the surrounding area of where brick is used in certain contexts. So the left is the side of a structure. So their side yard area has some brick around a existing landscaping bed, but it was not located in their front yard. And then further down, they have a side walkway that does feature some brick paving, but they still maintain their existing concrete primary entrance. So planning staff's review, we took a look at the record, the applicant's letter of justification, took a site visit as well, and really looked at sort of the feel of the entire area. And so the concrete stairs and walkways are a pretty consistent element throughout this entire neighborhood. There is one exception, and we'll talk about this in a second, but for the other properties involved, this is kind of an identifying feature of the Fayette Park neighborhood. And while that feature wasn't original to the construction of these homes in the 1900s and earlier, over time, it sort of attained significance in its own right. So since 1985, this is the elements that sort of have defined the Fayette Park neighborhood. And so the preservation guidelines would call for the maintenance of those and not deviating and introducing kind of that new element. Once again, finding that those yards are primarily sort of unfenced in or undelineated, gently rolling down. One significant exception, though, is shown on the screen here, 438 Fayette Park, which is a couple properties down. You'll notice that it does include that brick masonry type of element. Staff kind of flagged this during our review and asked the historic preservation staff for some further information on kind of how that element came to be, if that was ever permitted, and what the status was. But essentially, in the 1980s and the early 1990s, there was an existing element that was installed prior to the adoption of the overlay designation in 1985. And so in 1990, there was a certificate of appropriateness because that element was already there for that brick to be relayed. So the wall and the elements that you see here with a brick sidewalk coming in, as well as that brick knee wall, is really a result of them being required to administer that non-conforming element. But other than this home, the other 15 properties or so are pretty consistent in maintaining that existing concrete stairs with the wrought metal railing and kind of that open yard feel. So overall, staff is standing with the disapproval recommendation that was recommended by the BOAR as well as the Historic Preservation Office staff for the reasons that you see in the staff report, changing the vista, changing the visual character of the area by modifying something that is a pretty consistent element throughout that entire neighborhood. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you have of staff. HPO staff is available to present their information as well, and then you'll hear from the applicant. But if there's any questions directly for planning staff, please feel free to let us know.
Thank you, Daniel. Do we have any questions for Daniel at this time? Seeing none, we're happy to hear from Historic Preservation.
Good evening, Amelia Armstrong from the Historic Preservation staff, and also here is Betty Kerr, our director. I am going to include our record of the VOAR meeting for the record, as well as the guidelines. I'm going to run through a couple of pictures, but I might try to, Daniel, of course, did an excellent job sort of explaining the situation, but so I won't dwell on a huge amount, just on a couple. Of course, this is the same picture you saw before, and then walking around and showing the details of the project. And this was taken, and this is from our files, and that house at the 440 had also had, went before the board in 2006 to have sort of knee walls along their steps or in concrete, and just sort of to help as a retaining wall, and they did receive a permit here to do that work. And this porch was replaced. It actually had a different porch, and it was replaced in 2011 with the concrete steps you have now, and they actually recreated the porch based on a historic image that they had. And this is sort of walking through the neighborhood and looking at the other rolled earth areas. And again, we already discussed 448. And some other images of that site. This is actually the survey picture from 1985 that showed the brick retaining wall. And then after it was rebuilt, and this was in December of 19, or actually, yeah. And then some more images showing the rolled earth and how other people deal with rolled earth with ivy and other images. And then the structure as you see now, and with this actually has a concrete walk before with limestone curbing up to the concrete steps. And you can see the before and after of the porch that was restored in these two images. And we urge you to uphold the BOAR's decision. Should you have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. Do we have any questions? I have a question. So really the objections that we're looking at today involve not only the material of brick, but also the knee walls on either side of the steps going to the sidewalk.
Correct.
Aside from those two, am I missing anything else?
The limestone edging, right,
okay,
in the
all right.
front.
Amelia, and maybe this is not fair, but in your estimate, when would you say concrete really became pretty commonplace in a residential setting like that? Would that have been the 20s, the 30s?
I think it's even earlier than this. I mean, I think it would be, I mean, there's dates of it being around 1910, even. I mean, concrete was a pretty prolific material that was used because it was inexpensive.
Right.
And so I think there's a consistent nature of all of these structures having the same thing. And if there were more brick used, then you would see more brick evidence. Like in Gratz Park, you have a lot more brick.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular area, you don't have that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions?
And
Embellish
Oh,
in one sentence about your concrete question. Really, Lexington, I'm an architectural historian. I'm Betty Kerr, director of the program. And the pattern in Lexington, you saw very commonly concrete sidewalks as early as the 1890s. So I think Fayette Park likely had concrete sidewalks, some of those houses, from the get-go.
I would want to differentiate. Are we talking about the sidewalk on the street or the sidewalk to the house?
Both.
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 So what do you think could be the brick that was?
It could be
Subterranean.
brick from the house construction. It could be flower beds, brick. It looked to me like it's kind of piled, rubbled a little bit under there. It's not, if you excavate and find where there was a pattern of a full sidewalk or walkway up to a house, you would see a pretty even laid out, and they've just raised up the surface of everything above it usually. So it'd be a very rhythmic, this other didn't look particularly rhythmic, but in terms of the nature of it. But, without doing full archaeology on the site, you really couldn't make a case for one or the other. You'd have
But
to.
it's certainly possible that in 1895, when the house was constructed, the walk from the sidewalk to the house could have been brick, and at some point, to replace it in as cheap a way possible, they just covered it with concrete.
Possibly, but I don't think that given the nature of the architecture of these houses, that money was their problem. So it was more about what was in vogue, and these were houses that were rather forward-thinking and probably were interested in concrete at the time it came about. But without more physical evidence of a further stretch, I don't think anybody really professionally could predict accurately what the answer to that
Okay,
is.
all righty. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Mr. Penn, okay, all righty. If we don't have anything else, we will turn to Mr. Billings.
If you could leave actually the staff picture up there for just a second, and then we'll go over to my presentation. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the Planning Commission, my name is Nathan Billings, and I'm with Billings Law Firm, and it's my pleasure tonight to represent Kevin Egan and Adam Wheeler, the owners of the property in question. Mr. Egan is with us here tonight. I know that we're already at a long Planning Commission hearing after not only a regular docket call for subdivision items, but also for a ZOTA that was very long, and we're after 6 p.m. So I will be as brief as possible, but I also do have some materials to cover. So please bear with me, although I know that even myself, just sitting in the audience, I got mentally tired, so I'm sure that you all are in the same position. So this is, my background is, you all know me, I do a lot of land use, but some of you may not know that I actually served on the Board of Architectural Review for 4 years, and I loved working with Ms. Kerr and Ms. Armstrong. In fact, my office is housed in a building on Constitution Street that was completed in 1817. It's over 200 years old, and when we bought it, we did a massive renovation of that building. And it took about 4 months just for the approval process, a year for renovation. And that's one of 4 homes that I have owned that are over 100 years old in downtown Lexington. So I do these cases because, in part, I love historic structures. I'm not an architectural historian, and I don't claim to profess to have nearly the experience that the historic staff does, but I'm passionate about this issue. And not only do I represent people there, but I put my money where my mouth is because I've done this. Now, having said that, I did a massive renovation of my project. About a year later, I get a call from Amelia that, Nathan, you're taking out your sidewalk, and you're not allowed to do that. And Ms. Armstrong may recall that. And it might have actually been Barry who called me. I think it was Amelia, actually, initially. Because although I had gotten all of the approvals for everything else done on my building, the roofs, a new addition we did on the back, the HVAC units, some landscaping stuff, I had taken out the sidewalk because it was broken limestone and some of it had been replaced with concrete, and we wanted to replace it with a newer material that was honoring the old, but wasn't the same as the old. And so I hit pause in the work. We had to go through the process real quick. Had to come before the board. I got reamed because I was on the board and I should have known better. And it's okay, it's fair. Like I should have known better, but I made a mistake. But here's the key. Even when an applicant makes a mistake, the fact that they did should not be held against them in this hearing tonight for whether you should grant or deny the appeal. The issue isn't whether you think they should be punished or not for that. It's whether the request they're making complies with the rules. And I'm not saying that because I think applicants should do that all the time and come to you all and beg for forgiveness. I think that's a bad policy. But I also believe you all need to apply the rule of law and not punish somebody for whether they went ahead with work that you think they shouldn't have done. The question is whether the work that we're going to talk about complies with the Secretary of the Interior's rehabilitation standards and the LFUCG design guidelines that Lexington has adopted for the rehabilitation of historic structures. Now, before I go into my PowerPoint, I want to point out, this is a new, the top button is the one I want. There we go. So I think it's easier for y'all to see over here, isn't it? Okay. So you'll notice here, Fayette Park is, Mr. Daniel did a great job on a staff presentation regarding some of the beauty of Fayette Park. If you haven't gone down that recently, the winter, it's okay, but you should go back in the spring and just park and go walk in. There's a little city park in the middle there, we'll talk about in a second, and just go enjoy the tulips and the daffodils and the birds, because while you're 300 feet, less than that, from Broadway, it feels like it's a little bit of paradise. But you'll notice that while the lawns generally are open in nature, you're going to see that's not always the case. Many times, just like here, there are hedgerows that have been planted along it. There are sidewalks that have had limestone edging, just like this property in question, and you can see it, the old one here, the old photo here too, exists. So it's not like it's one common grass that goes along all of the properties at once. Every single lot, while there are some lot lines where you may not be able to tell the property difference, when we go through the photos, you're going to see there's differentiations of every single property in Fayette Park. It is not as monotonous as what the staff might want you to believe. If we could go over to my presentation now. All right, thank you. So first thing I want to note is this. You all don't get a whole lot of these before you, all right? I mean, we're in November, and this is the second one of the year. And so I may talk about some of the legal stuff a little more tonight than you all would normally hear, because you will already know about subdivision regulations. You will know about the zoning ordinance, because you hear about that not only in your subcommittee meetings, but also the second and the fourth Thursday of the month. But you don't hear a lot about these. These are somewhat rare for you. So this is the property, similar to the other photos they have. This is the old photo. Staff correctly commented the brick on this property had a red stain attached to it, and so when the applicant came to staff a year ago for a much bigger project that involved things we're not talking about tonight, one of those involved retuck pointing the house, and as part of that, the BOAR doesn't govern the color of the stain. So the owner's allowed to darken the stain color and change the stain color. So that's why it goes from what you may think is red brick, it's actually a red stain, to a darker colored stain. You'll notice this is the wooden steps that were located there. This was the concrete sidewalk that did exist. This is the limestone edging that staff acknowledged previously existed. But the concrete sloped back down towards the house. The result of that was, right here, the boards would rot out and water would collect. And so one of the reasons for wanting to rehabilitate the sidewalk was to correct the flow of the water away from the house and to prevent long-term damage for the steps. So this is what it looks like today after the work, similar to what staff showed you. That's a close-up of it. I'm going to get another close-up, and we're going to talk about some of these elements. And so what happened when the owners decided they wanted to do this project, as often happens, you go and sometimes you call staff, you meet with staff, you sit down, you do an application. Sometimes they're really long, sometimes they're very short. This one wasn't very long. This is the application which they asked for. They asked to tuck point the brick, which is an issue here, to rehabilitate the sidewalk and steps with no change to the shape or the location of the steps. They also filed a supplemental document with the notes. It talks about the tuck pointing, and then the sidewalk was also to be changed. Again, no change to the shape or the location. And here it talks about rehabilitate the uneven area, rehabilitate the uneven nature of the sidewalk. The same day, they met with staff, last November. Staff approved the COA to do the following: to tuck point, to repair the sidewalks as required, and to construct the concrete stairs. The reason I say this is because staff had already approved the removal of wooden steps with a masonry product for the steps, because the wooden steps were rotting out. And we believe, and I think part of the issue here is staff said, hey, you have to replace the sidewalk with what's there. So they issued a one-page document that's called a certificate of appropriateness. I'm sure it's in the staff file they've given you that has those 3 items in it. Following that, you notice that approval was November 27th. December, they start the work. And in the process of that, they do the tuck pointing. They're removing the concrete sidewalk, or their contractor is. They're moving the steps from the main streets to the sidewalk, to the house sidewalk, so the one you talked about or asked about, Mr. Davis. There's really two sidewalks. There's the street sidewalk, which is the one that runs parallel to the street, and then there's the sidewalk that runs up to the house that runs perpendicular to the street. So if there's a confusion when I see you sidewalk or walkway, please make sure you ask me. Then they remove the deteriorating steps. In the process of demoing the concrete, as staff already said, they found red brick in two locations. One was under the steps that go up the slope or that little hill from the street sidewalk to the sidewalk to the house. And the second was under the wooden steps closer to the house in the concrete that abutted it. Now, if they had found a very nicely done brick paver patio or walkway underneath that concrete, we probably wouldn't be here tonight, because that would have been really clear evidence that it had a brick walkway before that was being replaced. So at that time, the applicant said, oh, let's just put the brick back. Well, that's the mea culpa. Should they have come and asked? Absolutely. They should have stopped. They should have come and done it. I've talked to them about it, and they said, we thought that we had to go back with what was there, which meant concrete or brick because we found brick, and they shouldn't have done that. But you can't hold them accountable for that. The question is, with what they put back, does it comply with the design guidelines that the city's adopted and the Secretary of the Interior's rehabilitation standards? So in December, they proceeded to do the work. They also introduced, they moved the limestone edging that was along previously both sides of the concrete walkway and added it down to the front portion, mainly for erosion control because of the significant sycamore tree. You were right, Mr. Crum, it is a sycamore tree. It's a sycamore tree that probably is about 6 foot in diameter, 5 foot diameter. Two of us couldn't put our arms around it, it's so big. Its roots actually come underneath the sidewalk in this location. The roots come right under this area here. There was some dirt added back in to fill those areas because as water comes down the hill, it erodes out where the roots are. And I'm going to show you some pictures of similar to that in the neighborhood in a minute. So this is the work they did. They added in the brick steps where the wooden steps had been removed. Staff had approved already concrete steps to be put in, but they installed brick steps there. Down low where the brick steps had already been located, they added back in the brick steps. Of course, those are the two areas where they found the red brick. They then added red brick from the sidewalk next to the street back up to the structure. They removed the limestone edging from along the two landscape beds on the side. They backfilled this area. And you remember one of the pictures actually showed where the grass was a little thin, where they were getting to grow back after construction. And then they installed the limestone curbing. Now, it's not the exact same style that was on there before, so in my opinion, it does not meant to imitate the limestone curbing that was along the sidewalk before, but it is intended to honor and to respect that. Additionally, and I don't want to maybe be too wordsmithy here, but I don't think this is a knee wall. A knee wall to me means it comes up to your knee. The one at the other property that showed is a knee wall. This is 2 courses of brick tall. It's a planter pedestal. We can call it a knee wall, we can call it a pedestal. I don't want to get argumentative about it. But a knee wall is a length of wall at some height intended to hold back dirt or something. But it is a 18-inch by 18-inch, 2 courses tall pedestal for a planter to sit on. It does not run the length of the sidewalk.
Nathan, real quick, clarification. When you say 2 brick, do you mean 2 bricks laid horizontally?
I don't have I actually may have a close-up picture in a second. What I mean is 2 brick thick, meaning off of the base sidewalk here, right there, it is 2 bricks tall. Meaning, so it's two.
I see.
It's
Okay.
not long ways; it's short ways.
Okay.
So you have 2 bricks that look like this, and then
I
you
see.
have the limestone cap.
Sure.
That's correct. So
Okay.
if a brick is 3 inches tall, it's 3 inches, 3 inches, well, plus the mortar, plus
Sure.
the limestone.
Okay. Thank you.
So it is not intended to be a wall. You'll see some walls here in a minute. It is a pedestal on which planters are intended to be set. So in staff report said May. The letter I have says June. I'm not sure that it matters. Staff sent a letter saying that, and this is the typical staff letter, same one I've got, and I want to always credit Amelia whenever she sees things. Staff is always wonderful to work with people. I mean, they're respectful about it. And she says, this is our friendly letter that basically that you installed curbing and front step brick knee wall require COA, and that's a copy of the PDF of the letter that she sent. So in response to this letter, this didn't say, as we read it, it didn't say that the brick steps or the brick sidewalk wasn't allowed. It was talking about the curbing and the knee wall, or that pedestal. So in response to that, what happens is the applicant has to go file a second application for a certificate of appropriateness, which they did. And then in July 1st, staff sends out the notice for a meeting that references brick pedestals and curbing in the front yard. Doesn't talk about the brick sidewalk or the brick steps. Now, you're going to see why this is important in a second, but I hope you're already wondering, well, staff had something different in their presentation. This is what was sent out to Mr. Egan and Mr. Wheeler in response to application, and this is the notice that was sent out to the neighborhood. So this is the letter, the same one. This PDF doesn't copy as well, but it talks about install brick pedestals and curbing in the front yard. So two different things staff sent out. Three different things, I'm sorry, they sent out. Reference the pedestals and reference the limestone edging or curbing. Nothing about the brick steps or brick sidewalk being inappropriate. On July 17th, they had a hearing, and I think Mr. Crum and Ms. Armstrong fairly accuratized what happened at the hearing. The BOAR denied it. They denied it, but the staff report and the BOAR went farther than what the application actually asked for. What the staff reported on was that they had asked to replace the brick steps, to replace the concrete walkway, to install brick knees, and stone edge. Well, we believe that when they recommended disapproval, they said that new elements such as the brick walkways and knee walls does not, in a Fayette Park, that it does not have those elements. I'm going to show you in a second that that conclusion was wrong. Not only because there are not more than one knee wall, there are several types of pedestals or structures we're going to talk about. There's edging, and there is brick sidewalks and brick retaining all over the neighborhood. And this are quotes from the minutes of the BOAR hearing, which is in the file, that the BOAR made findings. They said there are no brick sidewalks in this area, a point corroborated by staff. We're going to talk about brick sidewalks. That the brick planter pedestal were knee walls. I don't think that's a knee wall. I mean, I'm going to show you pictures of other pedestals on which there's planters, and I'm going to show you a knee wall, and they are not the same. Finding the original sidewalk was concrete. You heard Ms. Kerr here tonight say she doesn't know what the original material is. We don't know what the original material is. The standard doesn't say you have to go back with only the original material. What I'm going to show you in a second is the standards say things should be done, which means it's permissive. It's not mandatory. So that doesn't mean that brick is not permitted. It doesn't mean that brick is precluded from being used. It talks about things that should, but it doesn't say shall. They talked about there's an absence of knee walls in Fayette Park. Well, we already know that's not true because there's at least one. And then they found that because they had not, and this is Mr. Dickinson's comment right before the motion to approve, said, because the applicants had not expressly applied for the use of brick and to install the pedestals edging, the application should be denied. That is improper as a matter of law to deny it because they hadn't asked to use it. The standard is whether the work complies with the design review guidelines and the Secretary of the Interior's rehabilitation standards. And again, I'm not trying to give a pass to owners to go and do something wrong and come back and ask for forgiveness. That is improper and that should not be done. At the same time, you can't use that as a reason to deny them. Or the rules need to be changed to expressly state that. So, there were no findings, though, in the motion by the BOAR that referenced the standards for rehabilitation or that referenced LFUCG design guidelines. So that's a problem as a matter of law. Your review here tonight is called de novo, and that means new. So while staff is correct when it cites to the zoning ordinance regarding you should give deference to the BOAR's findings, you actually have to make your own findings de novo or new tonight. You can't just say we adopt their findings. So if you know in a zone change, you will make a recommendation to the city council. The city council has some choices. Sometimes they can actually rely on your record. They don't have a de novo hearing. A lot of times when there's not any opposition or objectors, they adopt your findings without any hearing. It's not de novo. However, there's other times when the Planning Commission has its own hearing, like the mobile home park earlier this week, and that's a de novo hearing, meaning they're hearing all the evidence again. Whether it's good or bad, I don't know, but that's an example of the difference. So the first issue I need to talk to y'all about tonight is the due process violation, and that is when staff notified my clients back in June that they needed to file a certificate of appropriateness for two things, which was the knee wall or pedestal, I don't want to argue about the use of the word, and the limestone edging. They did it. They didn't file one for the brick stairs or the brick sidewalk because that wasn't what they were asked to do. But when we came to the hearing in July, the Board of Adjustment said your brick sidewalk and brick steps aren't permitted. Well, if they didn't know they needed to file an application for it, and they didn't file an application for it, it's not something the BOAR could actually deny them a COA for, which raises an interesting quandary because it would mean potentially that the work is there without a COA and we might have to restart this process. But for due process reasons, I don't think you all can deny them the brick sidewalk or stairs based on that. And so there's two solutions to this. One is that you all overturn the BOAR and say you didn't have the right to deny the brick sidewalk and brick steps, in which case it means staff is going to send them a letter and they have to restart the process for the brick sidewalk and steps, which sometimes the law is not always efficient. That might have to happen. Or alternatively, for due process, you all could say, oh, you may not have applied for it, but we think it's appropriate. I present that to you all, and I know Department of Law may have to weigh in on this at some point tonight, so that you all are aware that we're raising a due process issue, because that's unfortunately sometimes my job to put sticky stuff in the process. So the first issue for tonight is, I think, has got to be is whether you all can affirm the BOA's denial of the brick sidewalk and brick steps because the BOAR didn't have jurisdiction to do that. Or can you approve it tonight, overturn them, and then it would be okay? Second is, this is the de novo hearing, and whether the COA should issue for the limestone edging and the pedestal of the knee wall and the brick walkway and steps if you all find that my due process argument doesn't bear weight, and you're going to hear it all. So again, the standard has to be design guidelines, Secretary of the Interior standards. Here's the Secretary of the Interior standards. And the staff report, if you got to read it, cited things like the comprehensive plan, which is typical, and things like zone changes. The review process for the H1 overlays actually has nothing to do with the comprehensive plan. While the comprehensive plan sort of directs our general zoning, the standard review for an H1 application doesn't refer to the comprehensive plan in any way. Only the two standards I've talked about, Secretary for the Interior and the design review guidelines. So the standards are to be applied specific rehabilitation projects in a reasonable manner, taking into consideration economic and technical feasibility. The historic character shall be retained and preserved. The removal of other materials shall be avoided. Concrete steps and walkways and slope lawns are not features that characterize every single property in Fayette Park. You're going to see in a second that there are a lot of concrete walkways. There's also a lot of other walkways. There's a lot of limestone edging, and there's a lot of pedestals. It also talks about properties change over time, and changes that have acquired historic significance shall be retained and preserved. And we're going to talk about the brick knee wall that you all saw staff talk about a second ago. It was added before the historic district was adopted, and the BOAR came back and said, we're going to approve this structure, this knee wall, because we think it adds character and it is significant to the neighborhood. Ironically, if you were to think about the neighborhood in a parallel design, the property with the knee wall is on the back left of Fayette Park, and the applicant's property is on the back right. They are essentially, while the buildings themselves are not mirrors of each other, the location of these structures is mirrored to each other. Distinctive features that characterize the property should be preserved. New additions shall not destroy historic materials. Again, we have found brick. We know that concrete has been used there. There's no dispute about that. But just because concrete is used doesn't mean that other materials aren't used or aren't appropriate. And then we talk about new additions, and new construction shall be taken in a way that, if removed in the future, the form and integrity of the property would be unimpaired. I think you're going to see that. Rehabilitation guidelines. So staff talked about one guideline. I think there's several you all should consider tonight. So this is the LFUCG design review guidelines that the city has adopted in addition to the Secretary of the Interior's rules. So first one talks Article 1, 17, Section 13E talks about porches. Well, generally we're not talking about a porch rehabilitation here, except for the fact that they talk about porches of brick, concrete, or tile may have similar materials used for rebuilding front steps and stairs if need be. So there's clear reference in the guidelines to allowing brick to be used for steps. Section 22 talks about steps and staircases. Again, wood stairs accessing porches should be rebuilt and replaced with new wood stairs to match the original. However, original concrete or brick steps should be retained and repaired with materials to match. Staff had already allowed us to remove the wooden steps and replace with concrete steps, although there was no historic context for concrete steps here. So adding brick steps is no different in that context. Finally, we talk about how, or staff showed the pictures of where the brick was found under the sidewalk in the areas where the steps were. Now, one of the things that I learned on my time on the BOAR and also rehabilitating properties is anytime you start to dig up in the yard, and Ms. Kerr didn't, I think she was alluding to this but didn't really say it expressly, is you often find brick in the yard. It's oftentimes that the contractors dispose of brick, or they're actually making brick on site and firing it, and you would actually have piles of it. Well, a lot of times when you do that, though, you actually find a massive amount, and they're deep because they're filling a hole or a cistern. That wasn't the case here. The case here, it was 1 or 2 courses of brick in 2 different areas, which sort of belie that it's not just piled in a jumbled mess to fill a hole, that it had some type of organization to it. We don't know exactly what it was, but it clearly wasn't a dump site for brick. It had some other purpose. I can't tell you that it was a brick walkway, but I can tell you that it doesn't appear to have been a brick dump. The guidelines also talk about landscape and landscape features. Again, the guidelines in Lexington use the words should, not shall, not must, not required. Landscaping features that are altered or introduced should be compatible with the site and surrounding properties. We completely agree with this, that not just whether we have historical evidence for the use of brick on this property, but you're getting ready to see a bunch of photos, and you're going to see that landscaping features in Fayette Park are compatible with exactly what we've done in this project. Finally, we talk about landscape elements under Section 7 of Article 3. Landscape elements should be developed in scale, use, and character with the site and the local historic district. Again, there's a lot of reference to context to the local district. Brick is a commonly used material in Fayette Park. Staff showed you some pictures, but they're really limited what they expose you to for how much brick is used there. We're going to talk about walkways, knee walls, boundary walls, steps, stairs, porches, foundations, edging for landscape beds, utility strips. And here's the key. You know who does some of that in Fayette Park? The city of Lexington. I'm going to show you 2 examples where the city uses the very materials the city now says my clients can't use. So let's talk about brick. So I'm going to sort of go in a clockwise motion, starting at the entrance. Maybe a couple of my photos may be off. But this is a brick wall along the back of the alley here that separates the backyard. Again, it is a rear yard feature. It is not a knee wall. It's a 6-foot tall wall, but brick is used there. This is the same house. You'll see here brick steps. You'll also notice the difference in color of the steps versus the porch right there. So the significant difference of the color shows that, as you all can probably surmise, is that one is older than the other. One has been replaced, and if you notice, what are the darker colors? The steps, not the porch, which would lead not just a casual observer, but somebody who has done any type of rehabilitation to know that the porch has probably been renovated or rehabilitated more recently than the steps themselves. Going on, we have areas and we have steps in the neighborhood that actually have brick underneath with limestone caps on them. Now, I don't know whether the original steps were brick and the limestone caps were added on top. I don't know if the original steps were brick with limestone, and this is original, but I do know this. Brick is being used in steps in the park. This is a brick sidewalk. Not just staff showed you one. This is another one. This goes from the front of the house to the back of the house. It's not just hidden on the side. If you walk down the street, every one of these pictures I found by walking around the front. I didn't go in backyards. I didn't go behind fences. I was able to walk down the sidewalk and get every picture so that it shows a casual observer from the street element can see these things. Brick edging, brick edging, brick in the utility strip for sidewalks, brick edging. One of those pictures that staff showed you was the side, and I'm going to show you one in a second. It comes around the side of the property. This is common where brick edges beds from the front of the house, around the side, along the back. Again, more brick edging more along the sidewalks here. Another picture of the brick from a different angle. This is the house that staff spoke about with the brick knee wall. Interestingly, I didn't have the really old photo that staff showed in the presentation. It was the black and white photo. Clearly the brick wall in that photo had been rebuilt because it didn't have these little pedestal caps on it. And if you notice, what are these caps? These are one course of brick tall with a limestone cap on it. And what do we have across the street? The very same type. Now, we don't have a wall that runs the length like this, right? We have two small pedestals to sit the planters on. That's why I don't want to argue about the word knee wall, but ours really isn't a knee wall. That's a knee wall. We have another brick sidewalk in the front. We have a brick porch. There's another side of the same, staff has the same picture they added. More brick edging. Another sidewalk. This is hard to make in this photo, but the same house that has the brick knee wall also has a brick sidewalk that comes around the side, goes around, has a lot of moss on it, so it's kind of hard to see in this picture. More brick edging in the front of that house and the neighbor house's landscaping. Another brick area along the sidewalk in front, and these are the areas where the regular sidewalk comes out, crosses the regular sidewalk, goes through utility strip out to the street. This is Mr. Egan's house. This is the boundary wall in the backyard that separates him from his neighbors. It's about a 4-foot tall wall. Going on down the street, more brick, and then we come to at the very end of the street in a counterclockwise motion, another brick knee wall in a backyard. I can see that through the fence. Again, it's not a front yard element. I understand that, but it is an element that shows the use of red brick and the creation of knee walls, and again, these pedestal caps that are not uncommon in the neighborhood. All right, we have one for columns. Now, this is not Fayette Park. This just happens to be on Broadway right outside of Fayette Park, is another element of red brick, just for context. Now, there are two large landscaping islands in the middle of Fayette Park. It's one of the things that makes it special. And both of those are maintained by LFUCG. In the middle of it is this great little limestone cap seating area. It has limestone pieces on the ground back in here. Lo and behold, what exists to walk in there but a brick sidewalk on what the city has designed and used in its property. We're going to show you another good example of that in a second. So we believe that the historical context shows in Fayette Park that red brick is commonly used in front yards and materials, and that we are not the only property that has a red brick sidewalk. In fact, we showed you two full sidewalks, two side sidewalks, and several partial sidewalks, and multiple uses of brick and retaining walls and landscaping features and landscaping beds. All right, let's talk about limestone edging. Again, contrary to staff report, limestone edging is commonly used. Starting at the first property on the left, limestone edging for their beds. Same picture. This is the limestone curbing that exists. Now, with all candor though, limestone curbing was frequently used from the 1800s through the early 1900s until concrete became much more prolific and a lot cheaper to use and replace. And one of the detriments of historic areas is the loss of limestone curbing being replaced with, and you'll see it in a picture here in a minute, being replaced with concrete. I mean, you have a piece of limestone broken and they just pour concrete to do it. It's a shame, it's a loss, but to replace those is sort of costly but also challenging. But there's elements to show these are tall limestone curbs. These are not just 2 inches sticking out of the asphalt anymore. This is 4 to 6 inches of limestone curbing, limestone edging. Another picture, here's a picture of one that's broken and somebody has installed those temporary concrete pavers. You can get it at retaining wall, retaining bed things you get at Lowe's or Home Depot on top of the limestone. Another picture of that. Another picture of a limestone wall in a front yard for a retaining wall for the erosion. Another picture of where, this is actually where the concrete, you can see concrete has been poured over the limestone. Now, the very park I told you about a minute ago, owned by the city, the area with the brick I showed you was the middle section. The first section, when you enter Fayette Park, you have a big circle drive, and what do you see in the very front of it? Well, you see this very beautiful landscape bed right here. This says Broadway over here, you drive in here. Guess what you see? Limestone curbing. Guess who put that in? There's the other side of it. The city. So the city's done exactly what they're telling my client he can't do. Now, let's talk about the final one, which is why the limestone curbing was added. This is a property several ways up, but staff talked about how the property here sort of drops as you go back in Fayette Park. And back towards Broadway, it's pretty level, but as you go back, it's about 24 to 30 inches deep. And on some areas, you'll have erosion. And this is an example of where an owner has put their downspouts out to get away from their foundation, because as you all know, well, maybe you don't know, a lot of these old houses have, unlike modern basements, which have poured concrete and really good footers, they have limestone walls. And what happens when limestone comes right up next to the foundation of an old house? It comes right in. And there's ways to waterproof that, but the best way is to get the water away from the structure. So how do you get the water away from the structure? You bury it underground and you put a daylight pipe out a couple feet out of the house, or typically you want to get it as far out so it doesn't come back in the house. So this is an example of why that happens. There's another picture of that. So this is an example of what happens 2 houses down when the property starts to drop back and you don't have an ability to control the water. And so what you have is you have muddy messes where the tree is growing, the roots are there. And so this property does not have a limestone curbing here. And so what you're getting is the tree roots are now being exposed down here. And so what my clients did is installed a limestone curbing along here, backfilled it with fresh, healthy dirt in order to protect the roots and stop that runoff from coming down. Now, it's not part of this too, but they also installed a very complicated French drain system to get the water away from all of that. So it's all underground, so it not really part of an application, but because they want to control and keep this massive tree that's probably 150 years old or maybe 200 years old healthy for as long as possible. Another picture is looking along the edge right there. You'll just see the danger, what happens as the property drops as you go back in Fayette Park. And of course, that's what it looks like today. So they use the limestone edging. You can see the difference in the health of the berm right there, of that little hill, where they've used the limestone edging and backfilled with dirt and able to get grass to control erosion versus the other pictures we showed you a second ago. So let's talk about the fourth thing, planters or pedestals. And I appreciate you all bearing with me because I know you're tired and it's getting late. So these are also common in Fayette Park. One across the street, the limestone pedestal right there with a planter on top. There's a picture of both of them at that house. Another one down the street, again, limestone or poured concrete pedestals. This is the other side of that house. This is one down the street, another one down the street. There's 2 more planters on sidewalks, 2 more planters on sidewalks. And so, planter pedestals were used here. And I don't care if we call it a knee wall, just because, again, I don't want to argue with the wording. Plinth? I'll use plinth, I'll use pedestal. My purpose is not to argue over words. It's to show you that if you look at what was constructed right here, it is not a wall, it does not run wall. It is 2 courses of brick tall, it is capped with limestone. And while it may have planters that look a little different than others in the neighborhood, it serves the same purpose that multiple properties in Fayette Park already have. Pedestals for planters along the sidewalks. So, we understand that at least 7 letters of support have been sent in. I believe they're in the staff report, including emails and letters. You all may already have those in your packets.
We were given 1 letter.
There should have been some others that were submitted in with the original application too.
The letter we have is from Gary Bunch and Joseph Brown. And because we don't have our computers, I was just going to read it into the record.
Thank you. I'll try to get our copies later.
Okay. All right. This is a letter that was sent to planning staff October 23rd. Dear Division of Planning, our names are Gary Bunch and Joseph Brown, and our residence is located at 417 Fayette Park. It has come to our attention that the Board of Architectural Review is challenging improvements made to the property located at 430 Fayette Park, owned by Mr. Kevin Egan and Mr. James Adam Wheeler. Specifically, BOAR is concerned with the stairs, knee walls, stone edging, and red brick walkways located on the property. As neighbors to this property, we would like to express our complete support for these improvements made by Kevin and James and believe that these improvements strengthen and improve the character of the neighborhood, offer protection to the environment by decreasing erosion, and increase the value of the neighborhood both aesthetically and financially. Please feel free to contact us should you need further information regarding our position on this matter.
And as some clarification as well, it looks like within the applicant submitted packet that was also included in Granicus, there was a scan of a letter incorporated in those documents as well, so I can provide that for your review as well.
Of the same letter or another letter?
This is from Frank Close that was submitted, and it was addressed to the BOAR. So I believe it was part of
Mr.
their
Close's letter
filing.
was submitted with the original original appeal.
Yeah. So this was in supplement to that, but for the same scope of work, so.
And
I
then-
just, as far as what we have been given tonight to look at, we only have this one letter.
I understand. So you have a second one that Mr. Crumbridge told you about. There's a third one then that I thought you had a copy of addressed to Ms. Wade, dated October 21st, from Joe LaFoca and Aaron Beckerly. I'll pass this to the commission and then introduce that to the record. I don't have multiple copies of that. It can be introduced to the record, I assume. Mr. Crum?
Yeah.
Okay. So I stand corrected. Apparently there's 3. I was told that there were 7, so. So with that, I believe that the Planning Commission is authorized to issue a certificate of appropriateness on an appeal from the BOAR under the de novo review. I think that our position is that the brick sidewalk and brick steps weren't applied for and couldn't be denied, and therefore you all can't really approve or deny that as a due process issue because staff hasn't actually issued any finding of violation. It wasn't part of the application, and the BOAR didn't have power or jurisdiction to even hear that issue. And so your decision is really limited to the plinths or the pedestals and to the limestone curbing issue. However, if you were to disagree with that, we also think that we've submitted evidence to you to show you that brick is commonly used in sidewalks and in steps in the Fayette Park neighborhood, and that the addition of those things to this property does not detract or negatively affect Fayette Park, which is the standard under the design review guidelines. I'm happy to take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Billings. Do we have any questions for Nathan at this time? All right. Oh, no, here we go.
Mr. Billings.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I mean this in the most complimentary way. If I get in trouble, I'm calling your office.
You've said that before, but you haven't called me, so I'm assuming you haven't been in trouble yet.
Well, that's the good news. And I preface it by saying yet, as such. Number 2 here says a certificate of appropriateness shall be required before a person may undertake any exterior changes. Was that acquired?
For the brick sidewalk and the brick steps, no. The certificate of appropriateness was required to remove and rehabilitate the brick sidewalk. It did not specify that it had to go back to concrete or brick. Staff approved the removal of the wooden steps with the replacement of concrete steps. And the steps were then replaced with brick instead of concrete.
So the answer is what? Yes or no?
The answer is no.
Okay. Thank you. I rest my case. I'll call you. I will.
Can you
But again,
repeat that?
so, but that's a very good question, Commissioner Wilson, and here's why. And the BOAR did exactly what you just did. Mr. Dickinson at the end of the hearing said, you didn't apply for it, therefore I'm going to deny it. And that's not appropriate. The law doesn't say you can deny it because he didn't do that. That's not what the design review guidelines say. It's not what the article says. What it says is you do a de novo review to determine whether the requests comply with the Secretary of the Interior Rehabilitation Standards or the LFUCG Design Review Guidelines. So I respect you. That's why I said I don't want to give a green card to people to come in and do this. But I'm also saying you can't say no because you didn't think they filed first. And it's a hair I've got to walk. I've got to take that position. I think I'm right legally. And sometimes the law doesn't always make logical sense, although it should. So the question is, do you believe with what we've shown tonight that the elements put up there comply with other elements in Fayette Park and should be granted?
I'll still call you.
All right, Mr. Nickel.
Okay, so what was submitted was the request to remove the stairs and replace with concrete and to replace the sidewalk with no material indicated.
That's correct, sir. It said to rehabilitate the sidewalk.
Okay. And so we are getting, I'm following your argument, which is persuasive, that we are thinking of now a plinth and the limestone edging, if we were to follow your argument. Is that correct? That's kind of what we're looking at, or we can look at it as is it de novo, is this appropriate or not? It's two separate issues that can be addressed one way with a de novo decision by this group, or repair sidewalks as required with no material indicated could have led to the decision to use masonry, brick masonry.
So from a purely legal presentation, the first issue is whether you all believe that the brick sidewalk and brick stair rejection by the BOAR was properly before them. We don't believe it was, because we had no notice of that in the application, we had no notice of that in the letter, and for them then to deny it when we hadn't filed an application for it is improper. If you all agree with me, there's a process after tonight that we'll have to go address that. If you all disagree with me, you all would then include those two elements in the second question, which is whether either the two elements, which is the pedestal and the limestone curbing, or I should say, and the brick sidewalk and brick steps, if you disagree with my due process analysis, are appropriate, because there are elements of these things in Fayette Park. And it's not like my clients went out and did something totally off base, and I'm using vernacular now, not legal terms, but they are representative elements that already existed in Fayette Park. And I think you can make both decisions sort of inside of one, but I think you need to at least, my request is for you all to at least be mindful of the two different issues in a vote you make.
Go ahead.
All right, Mr. Penn, will you turn?
There's also the issue of whether the brick is appropriate in Fayette Park. And whether it be used for sidewalk or whether it be used for a planter box or whether it be used for a flower bed. And I think if what I've seen, if it's not appropriate, there's a whole lot of people in violation.
Including the city.
Refresh my memory, you showed us some brick that were like to the side of the houses. Were there others that were brick walk down to the street?
Yes.
Okay.
I know there's at least one of those, and I believe there might have been two. So that's one that's in the front of the yard. You'll see it's a continuation of the sidewalk from the house to the sidewalk, from the front sidewalk to the street. Same thing on part of that. And then, Kevin, is this the one that has the brick sidewalk too? I believe it is. I'm not sure if there we go. I know I had a picture of it somewhere. There's the one that has the brick walkway. This is one that also has a brick walkway that starts right about here. You can't see in this picture, and goes this way laterally.
Clearly brick has been used in front sidewalks, right? Elsewhere.
That's our position.
All righty. If we have nothing else for Mr. Billings, we'd like to hear staff's.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Nathan. Thoughts or any responses to Mr. Billings' presentation? However you all would like to, if Daniel or HPO, it doesn't matter. Whatever you all think's best.
Okay. So touching on, I guess, several different kind of facets to this request. I know there's been a lot of conversation about sort of what the best way to describe that, whether that's a plinth, knee wall, et cetera. We do have the certificate of appropriateness application that was submitted by the, I guess, the applicant's contractor that refers to the brick knee wall. That was sort of, may have been the genesis of how this originated. But speaking to the due process, we'll let Law kind of weigh in on that. But there were some remarks made about the findings lacking ties to the local guidelines. Both the staff report for planning staff as well as the BOAR both cite the specific guidelines that are being referenced. So those are in the record for your review. When we're talking about materials, it is important to note in the staff report we talk about brick was a common feature for construction this time, very clearly limestone as well. But it's not a matter of just brick and limestone, it's how it's used. They could utilize brick to make a 10-foot tall pillar in the front yard. Brick is common in the Fayette Park area. The treatment is really what staff is looking on, and the departure from what was there historically. So if we roll back to here, we've got a very visually different, two different treatments. We've got the existing concrete being replaced with the brick in a different pattern, rhythm, including these plinths or knee walls where that wasn't a present feature before. There was comments about the limestone features. Those are found in other places. They're not found boxing in a property serving as a retaining wall for the yard. We have elements where they're around a landscape bed around the side of the home, or they're serving that sort of purpose. But as far as that delineation, if you're looking back at the other homes in the vicinity, with the core exception of the property at 439 Fayette Park, which we did discuss, you're looking at open lawn sloping down. They may have vegetation. I think when there's the conversations with the BOAR staff or the HBO staff, that is a sort of separate consideration. But what we don't have is neat little boxes outlining the edges here. We have curbing, which is found throughout. There was some comments made about the character of these areas here. Well, first, LFUCG is immune from having to kind of do those considerations for historic preservation. And the treatment of a front yard in front of a home should be very different than the treatment for a public park or a public median. And so when staff looked at this application, looking at those consistence, there is an exception here that predated, by the records that we have, predated the existence of the historic preservation overlay in this area. But otherwise a pretty consistent pattern of concrete steps, concrete walkways working their way up. Brick is found in the vicinity in some various forms, but this is a departure from what they're showing. And they cite the historic preservation guidelines from the Secretary of the Interior that speak to additions that may not have originally been the most historic thing getting significance over time. And so the kind of ubiquity of that concrete treatment that's consistent in nearly every other property in Fayette Park, staff found that those changes deviated from that in a way that did not meet our local guidelines. So, with that, I'll let Law answer any questions about sort of due process, but the information as far as what was included on the agenda for that meeting, what was considered, I guess, at that meeting, the staff reports all touch on these various aspects. So I'll let them speak to any of the procedural arguments that Mr. Billings made, but staff found that the changes were not compatible, essentially.
Can you just clarify what I'm looking at on the left? Because it's hard for me to see. There's not are those trash cans out in front?
Yes.
Okay, and so the ground is sloping very gradually. It's not there's a great big drop off there. That's down to the sidewalk. Rolled, what are we calling that? Mm-hmm. Rolled earth or?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, do we have anything for Daniel before we either hear from Historic Preservation or Law? Seeing nothing, thank you, Daniel. Do we want to talk about the due process question real quick? Kind of a critical.
That's fine, and I'm going to sit here if you don't mind, because I am too exhausted to stand at the podium, as Mr. Crump did. So, lot to unpack in that. So I'm going to try to explain this as clearly as I can. If you don't understand what I'm saying, just say so, it's late. So I'm hearing the conflation of a couple issues in what Mr. Billings presented, which is due process and jurisdiction. So I'm going to talk about due process first. Due process requires notice and a chance to be heard. And I believe Mr. Billings' argument is that the letter wasn't specific enough on what needed to be in the COA. Instead, the staff report was more specific as to what should have been done. Keep in mind, in this case, we're talking about work that's already been done. This is not a case where a certificate of appropriateness was requested and then at the hearing, more work was denied that had not been yet performed. All of this has already been done at the time the hearing occurred. So this applicant received notice through the letter and through the staff report of issues that have been discovered where a COA was required and was not yet obtained. The applicant was then given a chance to be heard on that. So the remedy, if there even was a due process violation, and I don't think that there was, would be another chance to be heard. And as you heard Mr. Billings say, and as the ordinance requires, this is a de novo hearing where he, yet again, has a chance to be heard and is not confined to the record that was in front of the BOAR. So a subsequent hearing would address those issues. And the letter and staff report would have provided ample notice. So as to the jurisdiction, which I heard reference to, it is true that the BOAR has a more limited jurisdiction, which essentially means the power to hear cases, than the Planning Commission. But the ordinance actually does say that the BOAR has, and I'm sorry, my computer just died while I started talking. It's been a long day. So I'm not going to quote it, but it has other powers that's essentially implied. So, and there was a COA in front of it at the time the hearing occurred. So I don't see a jurisdictional problem, but again, we're in front of the Planning Commission today, and you can issue your own findings. So I think that what the BOAR did as far as the due process concerns is defensible. And I think that if the Planning Commission decided whatever you decide would also be defensible from a due process perspective. I hope that made sense. If it didn't, please say.
Thank you. And does jurisdiction wrapped up into that as well? That the jurisdiction is appropriate because you're at the Planning Commission now?
Yes. There's so much more to unpack in that, but I'm going to say yes.
Okay. All righty. Do we want to hear from our friends in Historic Preservation?
I'll be super brief. I think one of the things, and I'm just going to pass this to be passed around to you all in terms of discussion of sizes and layers of brick and all that kind of thing. It's just a close-up view, and you're welcome to fan through. There's other pictures in that from our staff materials, and it's all on the record already from the introduction of the record. Relative to the Board of Architectural Review's action to deny this application, their denial is supportive of the staff, it's Historic Preservation staff's recommendation for denial. And so Jim Dickinson's sentence may be exact. I'd have to go back and look that up about, he's saying they did this without a permit and therefore whatever. But really what they do at that is make their motion that they agree with staff's recommendation for disapproval, and then they take their vote and whatever. So they didn't add any additional guidelines to the staff report that they were bringing forward to further strengthen their action, but they always incorporate that staff recommendation unless they don't agree with it, in which they have to find their own findings. But the staff findings, complete with very specific by number and alphabet letter and so forth and so on, references to specific guidelines, they were all unanimously in support that this application did not meet those guidelines. And reporting that as one sitting in the room at the time it occurred, and certainly there's a full archived record of the same. I think that Daniel's comments here in the summary about the use of materials is a very important point, because you're kind of putting apples and oranges and bananas and all these different things in a basket and saying, well, they've used all these things, but it depends on how you use it, how the materials are used. And the thing to keep in mind, you're all well aware, historic neighborhoods evolve over decades and decades, and sometimes a couple hundred years. But they are not something that just has one look and that stays permanently, never changed. They evolve. But part of that evolution is on different levels of impact. So people putting brick, for example, between when sidewalks were first done, many of them did not connect the public sidewalk to the curb. They were just earthen strips all the way across. And so those are things where you saw people have dropped brick in that little cube shape between the curb and the crosswalk of the public sidewalk is usually where people just ended up with mud and they just dropped bricks on it. And that mostly would have predated, I would strongly suspect, when the historic overlay was put in. They're always an evolving kind of thing, and little things happen through time that you wouldn't necessarily, if you were approaching it all as one project in one effort, you would do a permit for it. But, you know, somebody back in the 1960s or 70s or 80s saying, I'm tired of getting out of on the mud in front of my crosswalk, they drop some brick on top of it, and it becomes, from there forward, there it is. I don't dispute at all that there are brick walks around the sides of some of these houses. They've edged their flower beds, but it's a different type of application of brick. The front entranceways and the rhythm of these 16 houses in this cul-de-sac, it's a very distinct identity to have the more formal, rhythmic character that you see throughout the district that happens in this instance to be concrete. And so I think that just addressing where these materials appear, but not addressing the differences in how they're utilized, although certainly you did address the nature in which they were utilized. I'm not suggesting you, as the representative, tried to pull the wool. You did not. You told them very plainly where you were seeing these materials. But keep in mind what that tells you about the materials, and that they are not all on the same wavelength of the outcomes for design within the historic neighborhoods. Things like the fact limestone is used for curbs. That's a very different, street curbs. That's a very different application from edging your front yards in stone. And you notice this property, and then staff references it, did have just up the center walk up to toward the front door, it did have limestone curbing. And unfortunately, this applicant destroyed that limestone curbing, the early original limestone curbing, in their work in accomplishing this. And that, had that been known at the time, would not have been approved for sure. Protecting the original historic materials, and we need to define original for a second here. Original is not always that George Washington sat in the chair and, nothing's happened ever since. It evolves over the years, and it's things that have come to have character, adding to what is the identity of these places. So the historic process is charged with protecting and retaining that character And the character timeline is measured really from what was it documented as at the time the overlay was put into place. So each of the 16 local historic districts we have, they're documented at the time they come into place, and it tells you this is what each of the properties had. It doesn't get every detail, but it gets most of it. And then you proceed from there to keep compatibility, consistency, continuity, and overall design aesthetics that are key to the identity of these neighborhoods intact. And this property is an example of that did not have the brick sidewalk from the public sidewalk up to the house, and the other features that are being discussed. The last thing I'd say is to refer you again, it's been up on your screen three times, but the discussion about to repair the sidewalks as required. That's pretty normal language in permits when you're dealing with existing conditions on historic buildings of any era. And it's understood and always been verbally discussed usually. The repair is meant to be in kind, as in you repair that which is broken on the stretch of sidewalk. You wouldn't repair it with alternate different materials. You would repair it with the same materials. So you probably were, the approach is intended to take out the broken panel of concrete, put in a new panel of concrete, skip the next two that are intact, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just a given that they'll be the same materials. So there was no expectation with the permit that was issued that got carried out in a manner not intended by this permit, no intention at all for brick to be there. And I don't suspect that brick was ever on the verbal discussions at that time. And then construct the concrete stairs, well, that was discussed and it was agreed to make a change of material because of the deterioration problems. Wood steps, lots of things have become quite a challenge that are out exposed to the weather where they aren't covered. Everybody knows it. Second growth wood and the materials on the market today are just pitiful. And so we are empowered as a staff to do some change of materials on some situations like that on a very limited basis without taking those things to the board. And that was what happened here. The decision was, in talking to the applicant, they're saying, I wasn't at that meeting, Amelia was, but I'm sure the discussion had to be about, we're really having troubles keeping these wood steps from falling apart on us and being a safety hazard, and decision was made to, through this process, agree to the concrete stairs. The problem was we didn't end up with concrete stairs. The property ended up with brick stairs. And again, it's in violation of the permit. So the permit that was issued by staff, along with the tuck pointing on the house and a myriad of other things that they were working on, was certainly part of how notice was known to these property owners of what was expected. And then when the violations were discovered of the things you've all been hearing about tonight, I think it's not exactly on target to suggest that they didn't have an awareness that this whole issue of everything in the front yard that was not in compliance was going to be brought and discussed at the board meeting. So I think that notice was provided. Everybody in the neighborhood knew to be able to tune in or come and participate in the meeting about elements on the front yard of the property and the front porch and area. So I don't think, while the wordsmithing might have been able to have certainly been better, I don't think the intent was missed. And unless you have questions, that's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Kerr. Do we have any questions? Seeing none, Mr. Billings, I'm sure you'd love a chance to just give us one more.
I love that Ms. Kerr said she was brief and she was up here about as long as I was. Let's deal with due process first, because there are two different words, and this is something that you all don't normally have to deal with in your zone changes, in your development plan approvals, in your ZOTAs that you deal with. Due process is important because it is intended to give an applicant notice of something, and a BOAR process starts one of two ways. It starts where an applicant contacts staff and says, I want to do some work, and staff gives them an application. They fill out the application, and that starts a process. A lot of things are approved at staff level, but like this case, they sometimes, and that was the initial scope of work was approved at a staff level. Sometimes they require a hearing before the board. As concerns the July 17th, 2024 Board of Adjustment hearing, that was triggered by the second way they happen, and that is that staff observes something an owner has done that they don't have a COA for that would otherwise require a COA, if that makes sense. In other words, they're doing work in violation, let's just be frank. And that's how this process tonight started, because on June 20th, and again, if you have a copy of the full record, I assume you have this letter. It was written from Amelia to the owners, Kevin and Adam, that says, this is a friendly note reminding you that this property is in Fayette Park Historic District, and the installed curbing and the front step brick knees wall requires a COA. Now, with all respect to Ms. Kerr, she can stand up here and say what their staff intended for that letter to say. It does not say the brick sidewalk, and it does not say the brick steps. It says the installed curbing and the front step brick knees wall. There's two things. There is no ambiguity in that. As a result of that, Mr. Egan filed an application. That application generates two things. It generates a notice to the neighborhood, and it generates a notice to the owner to let them know they've gotten the application. What did the application say with the knees wall? It wasn't playing wordsmith games. It called a pedestal or a plinth or knee wall. It used the exact same words that the staff had written them in making the COA application that the staff had used. So there was no ambiguity regarding what they were asking for permission to do, which staff said you hadn't done right. There was no game on our part on this brick sidewalk issue, because I don't want to play anything that is disingenuous. Okay, if staff had said the brick sidewalk and the brick steps aren't permitted, it would have been on that application and it would have been heard in July. That's not what happened. What happened was they sent out the application with those two items. Staff sent out the notice to the owner with those two items. Staff sent out a letter to the neighborhood with those two items. And they don't get the staff report before the meeting, by the way. The staff report is dated the same day as the meeting, July 17th. It's not like the applicant gets the staff report a week before, like you all know in your subcommittee meetings. We get the subdivision recommendations or zoning recommendation generally a week ahead. Now, they can change, usually from postponement to approval, but we have an idea what's coming. The staff report is dated the same day. The staff report identifies four things. Again, I'm reading from the record now. The applicant is requesting a COA for the review of the installation of the following work. Replace wood steps with brick steps. That's not what the application said. It's not what staff letter said on July 1st. It's not what staff letter said on June 20th. Second, replace concrete walkway with brick walkway. Again, wasn't in the June 20th letter, wasn't in either July 1st letter. Then it says install brick knee walls with stone caps flanking brick steps. That's the same reference to the pedestal, the knees wall, the plinth. Install stone edge around the perimeter of the arch. The same thing as the limestone curbing. The reason I brought up this due process is not to get off track, and certainly not to be difficult or challenging. But I have a duty to represent my client as an attorney here tonight. And he went to a hearing, and he didn't know those two things were on there. And I believe the correct process should be, you all should say, we're going to reverse the Board of Adjustment on the denial of those two things because it wasn't properly before them for due process. And the reason if there was a jurisdictional argument is it's not that the Board of Adjustment wouldn't have jurisdiction to hear it, okay? And it is going to come back up, so I'm not ignorant of this fact. But the staff hasn't sent Mr. Egan a letter, or Mr. Egan hasn't filed an application for that, and therefore the Board of Adjustment can't unilaterally say something. It's like this, me coming into a Planning Commission meeting, and Mr. Penn making a motion that says, Mr. Billings, I'm going to deny your zone change out on that farm on Tate's Creek. I haven't even bought the property yet, Mr. Penn. Well, yeah, but you're going to. It may not be exactly the same, but it's tantamount to the same thing, which is the reason we have due process is if they had known that was the four things, that's what they would have filed the application for. And I dare say I probably would have been at the meeting in July. Maybe we wouldn't be here tonight. Maybe we would. I don't know. And we may have to be back before you. But I raised the due process issue because I do believe that those two items, and I'm not disputing that staff has a valid point that says they disagree that the brick sidewalk and the brick steps shouldn't be out there. What I'm saying is it's not before you all tonight because it was never raised by staff. It wasn't in the notice letters, and the BOA exceeded its jurisdiction ruling on something that they didn't have due process notice about. So that's my due process piece. With respect to, can you put my slideshow up? That way I can go to the standard.
Mr. Billings, may I just, for clarity, ask you, since it's not my turn, but may I share a moment of your turn? Just
Hold on, Mrs. Kerr, Ms. Kerr, anything, I would want it to all be on the record, so if you can, yes, just ask it.
It's just that the staff report is sent out to all the applicants by email the Monday before the Wednesday hearing. And if there's a date of the actual date of the meeting, it means we've made some small correction that's not a meaningful one, sort of a typo or, whatever. But that is a standard practice, and I'm not trying to debate anything. I just wanted to enter it into the information.
I have a staff report that's dated the same day as the hearing. If the evidence is there's another thing out that they sent it out on Monday, I don't have that evidence today. I just have what I've been given. But I think what Ms. Kerr said is generally correct on the process, but I can't say it happened here because that's not what the staff report date is. Let me come to, let's see what this is. So one of my concerns with what you heard from Mr. Crum and Ms. Kerr here at the end was this idea that because they personally don't think that brick has been used in certain ways in Fayette Park, that it shouldn't be used in the way that the applicants have done. And that's not what the guidelines say. What's important is, you all have heard me say this before, and this is maybe one of my downsides as an attorney, is I'm pretty linear. I talk about this thing called IRAC. What's the issue? What's the rule of law? How do you analyze? What's the analysis? Apply the facts to that law, and what's the conclusion? And so what do the standards actually say? And so this is the one on steps. This says it should be rebuilt and replaced with new wood to match the stairs, for wood stairs. Original concrete and stairs should also be retained and repaired with materials to match. Should, not must, not have to, not required, not mandatory. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Article 3, the guidelines for site and settings. 6B, staff cited this, landscaping that are altered or introduced should be compatible with the site and surrounding properties. What this doesn't say is that you have to look and see exactly how everything is done in some measured way that it has to perfectly align. The fact that you have 16 owners in Fayette Park, which is a very vocal group if you piss them off, okay? 3 of them supported this with letters, and no one showed up at the hearing in July, and no one showed up here tonight, should give you an indication that the owners in Fayette Park don't believe this stuff offends the historic nature of the materials used in Fayette Park or the manner in which those materials have been used in Fayette Park. And staff can say that LFUCG is exempt from the historic guidelines. I don't know where that rule of law is. Perhaps it's true. I can't dispute that by citation to an ordinance today. But I certainly believe that if the city wants an owner to comply with rehabilitation standards, and the city does things that then it tells an owner it couldn't do, that's bad form. I certainly believe this.
Excuse me, I think I need to interject something because the historic preservation guidelines are in Article 13 of the zoning ordinance. And the city does not have to follow the zoning ordinance. So if you're implying the city has done something improper with its own property, I'm going to object to that characterization.
What I said was, I'm not able to cite to it to know the answer to that, and therefore I was going to.
It's Article 13 of the zoning ordinance.
Okay, then it's pointed out. But if the city has done it in a historic area, even if they're exempt from it, you would believe that an owner should believe that they could put the same materials in the same manner, like a brick sidewalk and like limestone curbing that the city has done in that area. Here's what I think is missing from all of this. And I've done, I don't know, probably 10 or 15 of these over the last 10 years. It's not a huge area of business for lawyers. Is that in these cases, there's a huge amount of subjectivity in historic preservation. This isn't a bright line test. It's not like a subdivision regulation where you have exact setbacks that you know exactly where something needs to go or not. You have a ton of subjectivity. And the question I would pose is this. If you look at Article 6B, if you look at Section 7 and look at those, is what the applicants have done with their house out of character and conformity with the neighborhood? Does it damage the neighborhood? Does it change the character of the neighborhood? Does it injure the neighborhood? Or within the terms should, does it fall within the gamut of permissible activities that are many, not just one? Could you replace it with concrete? Absolutely. Is brick appropriate? I absolutely believe it is. Could they have replaced the steps with wood? Yes. Could they have done it with concrete? Yes. Could they have done it with brick? I believe yes. The great thing about our guidelines is this. It's not always black and white. It gives room, and the reason is our city adopted the word should here for a certain reason, because it didn't want people to come and be hamstrung with the sword of Damocles every time they want to do something. They wanted to give the boards, the people who are entrusted to review these, the BOAR first and you all on appeal, with the discretion to look at those words and say yes, and to hear from owners if they oppose it, and to hear from staff, and to hear from planning staff, and to hear from other people who sometimes come in like contractors. But also to look at pictures and say, oh, you know what? Yes, is that different? Yeah, but different doesn't mean it's wrong. Is there a new brick sidewalk in the neighborhood? No, but brick is used in sidewalks. It's used in front sidewalks. One of the challenges of historic preservation, when I sat on the board, I remember, is this balance between what is historic and original that Ms. Kerr commented a minute ago. And here's the funny thing is, like, the longer something exists, they say they want to retain it and not change it. And then at the same time, when you file an application, there's this tension because sometimes they don't want you to imitate it at all. They want a new material. They want a new style. They want a new use so that it doesn't imitate it. At other times, they'll come back and they say, we want you to put back the exact same thing. The reason is because it's subjective at times. And it's not wrong. The process is designed for that. I don't have a problem with that rule. I just disagree with staff's recommendation, staff's conclusion here. So with that, I would just respectfully ask you to do two things, is to find that the BOAR had no jurisdiction and therefore violated due process when they found the brick sidewalk and brick steps were in violation, and that should be reversed, and there's going to be a second process if that occurs. And second is to find that the use of the limestone edging and the brick pedestals are in conformity with the rehabilitation guidelines and the design review standards for the reasons I've cited in my presentation. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Mr. Billings. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment on this application?
Is there anybody from the public here?
If you can't laugh. All right. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. What do the ladies and gentlemen of the Planning Commission think?
Mr. Chair, I'm gonna do what my cohort said a moment, I don't know, I was gonna say a moment ago, but longer than that, I'm gonna cut to the chase here. If I understand things right, from our legal staff, we're here to listen to all the facts and then make the decision that we think is best for all concerned, as to is this appropriate or not, for various reasons. And, you know, I've sat through many of these, and usually it's like, it's a vinyl question, you know. This isn't vinyl here. This is brick versus concrete. And listening to this, I think we've heard and seen examples of brick being used, curbing being used, pedestals being used, all of it prior to 1985 when the historic preservation overlay came into play. And particularly on this house, none of us were here when the house was built. I don't think concrete walkways were in existence at that time. Most likely it was brick. And, you know, so I think it's very appropriate for them to go back to brick. I heard something about formality. Concrete is not formal to me. Brick, maybe, but concrete is not. And I really do believe that it not only enhances the house, it enhances the character of the neighborhood as well. So for that reason, whenever anybody's ready, I'm ready to make a motion.
And I would like to speak to some of that. I'm not necessarily going to disagree with your motion, but I think, as I understand historic preservation, we're looking at the aesthetic, not the component materials. And Mike, you hit on the formality, informality. I don't call myself a gardener. I say grow things. I am in a garden club. I took the Master Gardener course, so I know a little bit about what I'm talking about here. Not historic preservation, just the stuff on the ground. But what we're looking at in the new version is a formal garden. The pictures I saw mostly of what's in Fayette Park, because of the concrete, because of the slope, although all of those elements are there, it's much less formal. And the challenge for me is I like the new aesthetic better. I think the more formal is more appealing. And if I lived over there, I'd say let's pass a petition and let's all of us do that. So it looks like that because they seem to be more compatible with the formality of those houses. But I don't think it's just about the elements. What the struggle for me is, are we trying to get to an end result that's the aesthetic? Are we trying to get an end result that is not everything got presented to the board, and what's the end game to get this resolved? Does it mean that the gentleman needs to go back and do another request and put the other two elements in there and have a ruling? Is the end result somebody has to scrape some things off and do over again? To me, that doesn't make any sense. So I'm not sure what the end game is here. Not what the law says. What's the end game that we're trying to get to? So that's where I am.
Okay, just a couple of things. What I heard Mr. Billings ask us to do is to rule on something which I have no legal background to do, which is process as such. His point is, when I asked the question specifically, he said, no, his client did not do that. But he came back and said, what we need to do is to rule against the Board of Adjustment because the process was wrong. That's the case, not the results, but the process was wrong, and the justification for where all this came about was improperly done. So I can't sit here and say, yeah, the process was wrong unless an attorney tells me that. If the attorney sitting in this room and is sitting on that Board of Adjustment said, yes, the process was flawed or something along those lines, then I could understand a little bit here. But our attorneys are sitting here saying there was nothing wrong with it. So now I have attorneys for one side saying the process was okay, and the other one saying it was not. That's my uncomfortableness. So can someone help me? Oh, right.
Well, I would be the one defending you, so you have that to keep in mind, since I am your attorney. But at the same time, technically the appeal, that is what Mr. Billings is requesting. The appeal is a de novo hearing for the certificate of appropriateness, and there are 4 issues that are being requested within the appeal. So I suppose if someone wants to make a motion as to the substance of that, you can do that. But if it's anything other than disapproval, we might need to take a recess to discuss it. That makes sense?
Can I put those in my words?
Yes.
Is the appeal a way to go back through the process and get some things straightened out that weren't straightened out before?
So, what?
Mr. Fenn.
Okay, so the appeal, normally what Mr. Billings is preserving certain arguments. I understand what he's doing. But the appeal by ordinance would be to either approve or certificate of appropriateness or disapprove it, period. So I don't think you need to make a ruling on any of those issues. Now, if you disagree, I can't tell you what to do. You're the ones that vote. We can discuss that. But the substance of the appeal is certificate of appropriateness and the 4 things that he has requested, which the front steps, the sidewalk, the stairs, and the knee walls, and the stone edging. Does that make sense? Everybody with me? Okay.
Here, Frank, talk into your microphone, please.
If the letter that the applicant received didn't include those 4 things, Is that a problem with process, or is that a problem with communication? Do our staff, whether it be planning or historic preservation, do they have an obligation to state in every letter they send what the problem is, or just there's a problem with your application?
We do not, the preservation staff, when the legal notice is formed, we do not enumerate every item. We put that work is proposed to build sidewalks and steps or whatever. It's meant to be sort of a catch-all. If it's, now, if, say it was work that's what we've talked about, the 4 items, but say it also included to build a swimming pool in the backyard, we would most definitely need to mention specifically a swimming pool in the backyard, brickwork and stonework in the front yard, and landscape features and whatever, if you wanted to do that. And if it included building a brick wall around the back of the property line, anything of substance that's separate from the core thing of front yard changes, we would have enumerated. But I don't know that we would have enumerated
Well, why,
4 items, 6 items, 7 items all in the front yard.
but why did we sit here and talk about for 2 hours things that weren't included in the letter?
Well, because our perspective is it was appropriate for the board to hear them, and that you're here to hear the appeal of the board's denial based on the design guidelines.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so the thing is, though, the work had already been done. So you all actually had the opportunity to know what was wrong, right? I mean, it's not like he was requested it and then built something
The
different.
staff knew exactly what was wrong.
Okay, and so that's why the staff enumerated everything in, is this how I'm to look at it?
You got to remember, you've got your certificate of appropriateness previously issued, but work done in violation. That's part of the list. And then you've got the work done without a permit in any direction. That's the brick sidewalk, and well, it's the brick sidewalk is under the violation to the permit. The pedestals and the stone curbing were new items accomplished without a permit. So 2 things were done erroneous to what the permit granted allowed, and 2 things had not been discussed with the process at all and were built, and all 4 items were in together because they're all in the front yard, man-made element stuff, put before the board, and the board weighed them using the design guidelines and basing their decision on the design guidelines. And the staff never had any sense that we were missing any aspect of it being known. We're quite particular about being sure we accomplish legal notice properly.
And so as a result of the applicant only being notified of 2 things being incorrect, you're saying it really doesn't matter until the staff, I'm kind of confused.
I didn't have any reason to think the applicant wasn't aware that the whole situation.
Let's take a moment. Does anybody have a copy of that letter that has 2 items, right? And then the staff report the day of the meeting has 4.
There's a copy of the June 20th letter that has the 2 items. There's the July 1st letter sent out by staff that has the 2 items. Here's the staff report that has 4 items.
Okay, so I think this is potentially the crux of the question. And what I'm struggling with is, if it wasn't, like Mr. Penn said, if it wasn't significant enough to put on the first notice letter, why was it then hugely significant in the staff report and tonight?
Well, it's very common, and I'll just one sentence, it's very common to have there be, some of these projects have 15 and 20 items. We don't list every item. So it's not unusual to not have each element enumerated, but that's up for you all's discussion and decision. So I'm not going to beat on you any longer on it, but I'm just telling you, nothing unusual happened in this.
All righty. Thank you, Ms. Kerr.
Thank you.
Okay, well,
Was there a Monday before the hearing, like 2 days in advance, report sent out to anybody? Do we have a copy of that?
I don't with me. Amelia took her file. Her child's gone to the emergency room, so she's left. But it's in the record. Our staff report is in the record, and it will just be in our emails. We send them an email saying, please find attached the staff report for Wednesday's meeting or something to that effect. And it attaches the staff report for that individual application property, yeah. And I just know to tell you they go out regularly every Monday before the Wednesday meeting. I cannot tell you specifically, personally, whether this one went out or not, but I have no reason not to think it would have. Every applicant receives that the Monday morning. And the reason it goes the Monday morning is because it gets in the hands, process-wise, it has to be in the hands of the Design Review Board members, the Board of Architectural Review, before it's circulated to the applicants and to the public. So it's not a just off-chance kind of event. It's very structured.
okay. Mr. Owens had his hand up.
Can I clarify one more time with our legal staff that we are here and we have the ability to make a decision whether this is appropriate and approve the applicant's appeal? Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I got all
I'm
of
sorry.
that.
We have the ability to accept the appeal and move that all of the request was appropriate and be done with this?
All 4 items?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
but you need to make a finding to that effect, which is referencing the guidelines.
Do you want to talk to me for a second?
Do you want to take a recess for a couple minutes?
2 minutes?
Do we even, I mean, that sounds pretty simple. If we say it's in accord with the design guidelines as set out in our historic preservation ordinance.
Okay. I mean like a 2-minute recess.
Okay,
I
2
don't mean
minutes, that's
something
fine.
long.
That's fine. What's another 2 minutes?
I'm not trying to keep you here longer, I promise.
I can't imagine you want to be here either. All right. Thank you all for your patience. Mr. Owens?
So, yeah, the short of it is, I think everybody knows my feelings and where I am on this. So I'm going to move to approve the applicant's appeal. This is in reference to BOAR 2024-2, 439 Fayette Park. I move to appeal I move to approve the applicant's appeal and grant the certificate of appropriateness, the proposal for replacing wood steps with brick steps, replacing concrete walkway with a brick walkway, installing brick knee walls, whatever you want to call it, with stone caps, flanking brick steps, and limestone edging around the front yard satisfies guidelines 336B because the brick and limestone walkways and edging is compatible with the surrounding properties as multiple examples of nearby historic properties were provided. This certificate of appropriateness is conditioned upon the following. Any additional changes be brought back, wait a second now. Any additional, any additional changes, once reviewed by other divisions of LFUCG, be brought back and reviewed by the BOAR.
That's any future changes?
Yes.
Okay.
Any additional changes.
Any additional changes?
So,
And you can put in future if you want, that's consistent with that.
there's a
Alrighty.
motion.
Thank you, Mr. Owens, and Commissioner Nichols seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of that motion, please raise your right hand. That is almost, Mr. Owens, are you in support of your motion? Okay, okay. All right. I did not. Okay, so that's almost unanimous. Mr. What's your name? Wilson is your lone dissent. All righty. Thank you, staff. Mr. Duncan, do we have anything else?
Mr. Chair, a quick 30 seconds. Just as a reminder, we are off schedule this month for our meeting, so we will meet again 1 week from tonight for the zoning hearing for November because of the Thanksgiving holiday, 1:30 in the council chambers, and I hope we conclude our business there that day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Without objection, we're adjourned. Thank you.